Hey everyone, this is Saksham, founder of Lights Out Studio and partner at Lights Out Venture. Well, I've been onto something incredibly exciting for the past few months. I have met some of the most celebrated entrepreneurs in the country. This actually started with me identifying a gap in the Indian startup ecosystem. You see, even though startups dominated the past decade in our country, we still kept looking back at what Silicon Valley breeds in its culture. I thought it was time to change this. So here I am with an all-new limited edition series where I talk to founders of some of the fastest growing startups in the country. And we ditch the traditional podcasting format that you've known. So sit back, sip that drink as I bring to you In the House.
I've personally been a fan of great branding, and just look at this card, man. It just is so beautiful. This is my first interaction with Fi, and I sort of dug deeper into what exactly is a neobank. Little did I know that this one was founded by the same team that built Google Pay in India. What a remarkable experience these guys would have had. I dropped in an email to Sumit and said, "Hey Sumit, I want you on my pod." There is so much that comes out of this conversation, especially about the progress of Fintech in India, the laws governing good and the bad side of how businesses can prosper, and so much more about building teams and leadership. Sumit is an iconic entrepreneur in India, and every bit of this conversation has so much depth and experience associated with it. You're going to be scrambling to keep up with every bit of this conversation. So here's presenting In the House with Sumit Gwalani. Take it away.
College students in University of California keeping their legs up high on your face, right? So you got used to that much earlier.
And you couldn't do anything about it.
Couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
This was like you were teaching sophomores.
Yeah.
Logic. I forget what was maths or logic. Something it was, and it was like a culture shock. You would never do that in college here, right?
Yeah. No, so I think India, in that sense, has been far better. People have taken education a little more seriously wherever they could, as much as possible, right? Influenced by the West for sure in a lot of ways, right?
Very true.
But they've taken education seriously, and is that one of the reasons why India is considered far more superior in terms of, say, talent, and we're all across?
What I would say, fundamentals, and thanks to great education, is a lot more solid for folks in India.
Right.
And that's important. That's when I say fundamentals, you can take each, whether it's design, whether it's engineering, whether it's others. The concepts are a lot more here. Where we sometimes struggle is the practical application of it.
Right. So on that part, right, a segue to that is, you look at the generation that pushed us to take education seriously, right?
Yes.
The generation before us. Is that one of the reasons why, and they come with a slightly more traditional mindset. The traditional mindset does dissipate into everything that we're seeing even today to certain extents, right?
Sure.
Society and so on. Do you think that was the reason why Indians have taken education seriously? Because we were driven that way. Society was wired.
I think definitely you heard that every morning, every night, from your parents, from your teachers, from everybody around you. And that definitely, I would say, played a huge role. Is that the right balance between what's happening in India and, say, the West? Maybe not. Maybe you need somewhere in between, a balanced approach. And you're starting to see that today. Extracurriculars, going beyond your classical maths and science is a lot more important today. But I think we're going in the right direction.
And is entrepreneurship a need gap of trying to fill in, say, social pressures that emerged in India, or was it purely influenced by the West? Because you've stayed out there, right? You would have seen India from an outsider perspective, being an insider, right? How has entrepreneurship emerged?
I think I might have a contrarian view here. Entrepreneurship has always been there in India. From your small roadside stores to the 50 million merchants that we have, that's all entrepreneurship. What we have not seen is the influx of capital that allow people to take bolder and bigger risks.
That's fairly new.
That's fairly new. A lot of entrepreneurship was taking help from your friends, family, or small loans at very high interest rates, which means that they could dream, but the dreams were limited. Where capital is there now, suddenly you've got ideas from a generation that was always there, but now that ideas can be funded and you can build amazing things. So what I expect in the next 10, 20 years is India to explode with new innovation. What's happened in the past is, if you talk about tech, we have been a services country.
As an offshore service
As an
provider.
offshore service provider.
Yeah.
Most new stuff, or think about as patents, if you want to take that as a really bad analogy for it, has happened outside of India. Can real innovation of developing new things with ideas start happening in India? It has. In the next 20 years, you'll start seeing everything being built in India from tech to non-tech.
Yeah.
Because there is capital now way more than what was there 20 years back.
I was actually studying the pattern of how capital infusion has increased in its pace. Right, and if you traditionally look at companies that started in the 60s, 70s, right, the Tatas and the Reliances and the likes, they built a foundation, or the ideology was to build a 100, 200-year-old lasting business.
Yes.
And that's true. True. Right, today they may be launching emerging tech verticals that are PE funded and that are galloping much faster. But the foundational ideology was long-term sustainable ventures. Right?
Yes.
And then the 90s and the early 2000s saw emergence of tech, largely services, you're right. And after 2000 is when we started seeing new product ideas take shape that were very specific for the Indian market.
True.
Right. And so right from the emergence of Flipkart, I feel that was a little bit of a turning point where even though the idea was emulated from the West, it was largely meant and wired for India, and hence it was driven in a way, right from culture to ideology to offering, that it would serve India only as a primary market, right? And that's when the Paytms and the lens carts and all of those sort of start to come in. Today, if you look at capital infusion, the pace is so much higher. 2021 has seen nearly $3 billion infused in startups, which is the highest ever in one financial year.
Yes.
Right. Why do you think, and if that's the case, do you think that will also, while it will push people to take the leap, the mortality rate of ideation and startups would start to be on the rise?
So that will happen, right? Because there is a lot more capital there. So venture funds are taking much bolder and maybe riskier bets in that sense. But if you don't do that, you won't see the kind of surprises and innovation otherwise. And yes, as you said, the other side is you will see some startups not last through. But if you don't do that, there are potential ideas, potential groundbreaking things that you're missing otherwise.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the ones that will just fly would create a certain kind of a revolution or open new sectors.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you guys did that. Yep. You guys did that. It was a bold move. The concept of neobanking didn't really exist. Right? And while we're going to go to one of those, about 3 or 4 years back from now, you're walking outside today you see people transacting on Fi, right? You get the data back in the company, I understand, but you see people transacting with Fi. As an entrepreneur, what is the feeling that you have when you see others hearsay or talk? This is what Fi is up to.
I think it's initially curiosity, right? What are they talking about? But then it's,
is this my target demo? Am I going right?
Yeah, it's like, is it working, right? I think for an entrepreneur who started with, doing this business because with a mission statement, and a mission statement that could help demystify finances for people and help them maximize their savings and investments, it's not about usage. It's about, is that usage adding value in people's lives? Because a lot of time when you build successful companies, you sometimes forget what you started it for. And whether it's been for Fi or whether in my past journeys, it was about, is it causing that impact in people's lives? Is it helping them be a little bit more efficient or understand their finances better in case of Fi? Is important. And that's really the first curiosity about it. And then when you know that has happened, then it's a feeling of satisfaction.
Yeah, it's not accomplishment, it's satisfaction.
It's satisfaction.
Yeah, that's true. And when you say impact, right, is there a way that you measure impact?
So yes, right, of course, and
because it's subjective.
So there is anecdotal data that you will hear from people and stuff. The real way to measure impact is go fine-grained on your data. And when I say data is not just number of times a user transacted on an app or number of times somebody searched on say an ask.fi or something, but it's more their experience. Are they beginning to use Fi as at least an operative account, or their salary account, or their savings account? People use different bank accounts for different reasons, and are they beginning to use as one of these forms? And if they are, that means it's seeing some value in their lives why they're choosing this over the thousands of banks that already were there in India previously.
Yeah. No, I remember as a user, I knew of Fi that exists, right? So I may be a very typical customer, right? And I knew for very different reasons, right? I come from a little more of a tech and design background in terms of the work I do. So we knew Fi is doing something groundbreaking design, very intuitive interface and so on. And that's why I knew of Fi. And then I knew of neobanking as a sector that's emerging, right? I still hadn't put both of those together in terms of what exactly is a neobank and what is Fi really doing groundbreakingly different as a neobank, right? And when I got to it, I think there was a change in perspective. There was a change in perspective not only for what the sector is, but also for what the future of fintech or transactions, lending, investments in India could totally look like, right? We come from a place where we go to a bank site typically once a month, right? When you want to make that RTGS, NEFT transaction, or somebody would do it for you and so on. But Fi makes it a little more sticky for you to come back very efficiently. Right? And it's a very smooth process. And maybe that's the thing about neobanks, right? You put a face on top of an existing infrastructure to make it more comfortable and convenient for the customer. Is that where fintech is typically headed in India now?
That is definitely a space, but if you tell me what's the final thing when it comes to fintech, it's what I call as hyper personalization. Here is an example, right? You could have two different folks, same age, went to the same school, went to the same college, joined the same company in their first job, but are completely different financially. One person is spending as they get. By end of the month, they are out of their balance. The other person has already saving, has got a bike, or has opened a fixed deposit or put some money in a mutual fund, is living it differently. But today, most financial apps out there are the same for everyone.
Yeah.
The max it would change is maybe the banner or an ad or something changes across for two different folks, but your app is same for you and same for me.
Yeah.
In today's tech age, that just doesn't work. I want something which is for me. Any millennial, Gen Z, or even somebody who might be in their 40s wants something much more personalized. Your Netflix shows you movies that you might be interested in. It's not going to show you the same screen to everybody.
And we like that.
And we like that. We love that.
We gravitate towards things that are meant or wired for us. And if now there is a platform that's not pushing results that are to your liking or interest, it's not something that we would essentially go back to.
Exactly. And how do you reach there? That's really what all fintechs are going towards, in my opinion. You can't do it overnight, but can you get there? Because that will then help somebody who is, saving to maybe save more, or maybe get what they want, but the other person with still letting them live their life. It's not about telling people change your lifestyle or anything, but helping them still figure out ways where they are doing well.
Yeah. And with people, right, I'm going to just take a step back.
Yeah.
And this is something that I love asking people, right, or just kind of love understanding. It's just the curiosity to understand how, as a product, do you solve for your first 100 customers? There's a cold start problem.
Yes.
Right? It may differ from sector to sector. How do you solve for that cold start problem? And maybe through the lens of FI, or maybe through your understanding in a sector like this. Because there are two ways to look at it, right? Awareness of neobanking does not exist. You were one of the first players. The other bit is awareness for what the product offers, the feature stack, and what's your differentiator.
Yes.
Where do you go first? What do you attack, and how do you get your first 100,000 customers on board?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it really varies from product to product. Sort of talk from a financial product, it doesn't matter whether it's payments or neobank or anything. I think the first question you need to ask yourself, why you're building this. You need to sort of know this is the user problem that you're trying to solve, and this is the impact. So if let's take neobank for example, since that's what FI does, is the idea was, as you rightly said, you probably end up using a banking app once or twice a week, but you go and ask 10 millennials, do you know or do you understand your finances? And 8 out of 10 in our research basically indicated they have no clue. Second, when you were spending, is there a way where you know how you can start saving more or how you can grow your money? And folks had no clue to it. So that helped you identify what do you build to build your minimum viable product. Now you may say, okay, wait, why in the world you build a neobank when you're trying to solve for
Education, understanding,
and increasing their savings? And for us, again, that was all down to research. What we realized is, if you try and solve these problems from the outside by being just a PFM app, and we have had some good ones in India and maybe Mint in the US, users love it for the first month, 2 months, 3 months. But then it doesn't allow them to take actions based on that knowledge. So that knowledge gets redundant very soon or stale. And if you really have to create
there's no stickiness, there's no reason to come back, right?
Yeah, I've seen it
You're
once.
not a news product. Why would I come back to a pure education product which is trying to ease, say, financial jargons for me?
Exactly.
Right? So it's got to be embedded with habit, I feel.
Habit, and what our theory was, it has to be at the epicenter of their finances.
Yeah.
And what's at the epicenter of our finances? See, today, if a Google Pay or Phone Pay app goes away, I will be unhappy for a while, but then I'll still live with it. Because it was a mode that helped me with my finances. It wasn't the finance itself. But if your banking app suddenly goes away, you are all over the news.
It's like your passport's gone.
Your passport's gone.
Yeah.
It's your center.
Yeah.
And so for us, we very easily realize after talking to people is the epicenter of people's finance is their banks even today. And if you have to make a real change in people's lives and give that hyper personalized experience, you have to tackle the bank.
Yeah.
And that
emerged as a challenge. That emerged as what people felt that they needed.
What people felt is that they wanted personalization.
Right.
They wanted understanding. They didn't know how. And you had to join the two pieces together and say, you know what, because the question asked was like, in India, banks are doing payments is there, everything is there. Why do people need a neo-digital bank in that sense? The existing banks work fine, GPay and PhonePe works fine. And our theory was, people still want that personalization and the ability to do actions, which you can only do if you become their epicenter.
You're getting that research in, you've understood the insight or the gap that exists, right?
Yes.
You've understood who your user could be, potential user could be, right? And you can build a product for them, right?
Yes.
So the expertise in product and tech exists.
Yes.
The understanding of the insight exists, and awareness of your user is out there now, right?
Yes.
You say millennials.
Yes.
Right? How do the three of these come together now, right? Because the millennial knows the challenge,
Yes.
but does not know of who's solving it for him.
Yes. And so once you have built the product, the way you have to ask is, what's that thing that excites a millennial? It has to be exciting for me to try it out. People are spoiled for choices today, and that's great. That's great for the consumer. So how do you build something that is valuable, but at the same time is completely, I would say, not heard, not seen before, and that catches attention. And
is the novelty quotient playing here?
The novelty quotient is playing there, but it has to add value. It can't be a novelty quotient just for the heck of novelty.
Yeah.
Right? And so for both Fi and the last product I did, that were the hooks. So let's talk about Fi first.
Yeah.
Fit rules, which is when you every time Bumrah takes a wicket, you start saving 100 rupees aside, was a concept that nobody had heard before. And that made people, oh wait, they are thinking something that will help me save. So that gave them a reason to check out the product. And once they checked out the product, we knew with the design and the product that they will be hooked to it.
Yeah.
We saw that similarly in GPay, which was my last product, where we actually had audio payments that got people to talk about, wait, payments are there, but this is what does it mean that I can pay to somebody without, literally being next to each other and with the audio sound, and that caught attention.
Yeah. And on that, let's go back to GPay, right, for a minute. You guys conceptualized the whole concept of Tez, right? And it's like a startup within a mega startup, right?
Can't call Google a startup, but
for me, startup is a mentality.
Yes.
It's a mindset rather than the volume or the value that you're just trying to provide.
No, Tez was a startup. I just said you can't call Google a startup.
Yeah, okay, fair. We won't call Google a startup. So when you talk about Tez, right? How big was the team? And that was entering. It was a new sector that was emerging. Early 2010s, 2011.
The Tez was 2015.
This was 2015. Yeah. Paytm was already there.
Paytm was already there.
Yeah.
MobiKwik was there. Freecharge was there. So payments were, people had loved payments. Digital wallets was there. And to your two questions, first the team that was there, we started with literally a 3-member team, and almost like a startup did a pitch to say we need a seed and get some initial funding to build that. And what was the hypothesis, right? Our hypothesis at that time was wallets were using, but India's wallets were being used what is called as JIT or just in time, which means whenever you wanted to pay something, you funded your wallet with 200 rupees or 300 rupees and made a payment for 100 rupees.
Yeah.
People didn't want to put too much in wallets, and that really was the thesis of...
That was a differentiator.
That was a differentiator. That was the thesis of like Tez or Google Pay.
And was this something that you all knew of because you were experiencing it as users, or was this research driven?
We had instincts on that, but it was, proven by doing a bunch of research.
Yeah.
So it's a combination. It was instincts based on us being users, but then also doing that. And then ability to solve both, this whole problem of just in time, and also what would make it very easy across consumers and merchants. So and so that resulted in us
and the infrastructure existed. You knew how to enter the markets.
Actually, UPI didn't exist. When we started in 2015, UPI wasn't there. There was a talk about UPI. So most folks don't know that the first internal version we built of Tez was actually built on IMPS.
Wow.
It was never launched.
Okay.
Because by the time we built an IMPS based version, UPI launched. And that way initially UPI was going to be limited to the bank, so we weren't sure whether we were going to get to use it or not use it.
Which you could always mask it with the bank as a backend infrastructure.
It wasn't clear at that time, right? And then once we knew we were allowed to use it, we were big fans of UPI and were like, happy to contribute and suggest our ideas to it. And then when we said, okay, you know what, UPI can be used by us, we quickly migrated. The design and stuff remained the same, but we migrated the backend to go from IMPS to UPI.
Yeah.
And we launched with UPI then.
Yeah. Wow. And with both of your stints, right? And one is an entrepreneurial stint, and the second one's an entrepreneurial stint.
Yes.
Right. You raised funds.
Yes.
Right. Let's just talk about the journeys there. Maybe juxtaposing them against each other. But where do you start? Like, you've got the idea.
Yeah.
The gap exists, and your ability to create a fine product.
Right.
Where should funding typically come in, and how does that roll for a startup in India now?
So I think if you can start and you're fine, you're doing well, then you can fund yourself and maybe a few others and get a proof of concept out there. Nothing beats a proof of concept.
Did that happen with Fi?
That happened with Tez. It didn't happen with Fi. With Fi, we were lucky enough of having done stuff in the past. So we had an idea. We had some really interesting stuff. So we spent a lot of time on design, but we didn't convert because you're trying to build an entire neobank. It's not going to be built by 3 people. There's no point of a proof of concept there. That's almost like going all in and building an entire infra. So we spent a lot of time in building mocks and experiences and doing research on that. So we spent time on that and proved that if we build this around, users would love it. But that really was not, I would say, mock wasn't possible there.
So I think from how I look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Fi was betting on the future of neobanking.
Yes.
Right? There was no present.
There was no present.
Tez was banking on the gap in the present market.
Yes.
Right? And can you fit in?
Yes.
Right? So, and the experiences of investments in both of these spheres would be very different.
Agreed.
Right? Is there a process, or is there a way in which you typically know or understand? How do you literally go to an investor and convince them for a market that you think exists, or you want to bet on in the future? Because Fi did that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get a bunch of folks who are like coming for an angel investment, right? Like asking on that point is like, how do you convince an investor that this is the future? And depending upon what you're doing, like if you're going from horse cart to cars, your pitch is going to be very different from saying here is a 25% improvement or a 50% improvement or even a 100% improvement. And I'll still go back to that. If you can build a POC that can wow the investor, that's your best
with
bet.
traction, using POC in traction or no? Just
Even without traction, right? Like if you have that, without that, you're not really ready. But once you have that, you're ready. And then if you can show traction, nothing like it. So here's my point. You're at an angel when you have a POC.
Yeah.
You're at a seed when you are starting to show some initial traction.
Yeah. Investments can't sustain your product.
Yes.
Your revenues have to.
Definitely.
Right? So it is important for you to become profitable at some point of time, and it may be a little distant in the future or a few months down the line. But that road to profitability has to exist.
No doubt about it.
Right? And do investors bite into that story when they're funding for a new sector? How difficult is it? I mean, because
so I think it depends on the market. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years back, investors would just say, get users. That's important, and we'll figure out how to monetize later. I think that time has gone. Maybe it will come in the future, right? It's all cyclic. But in today's day and age, investors definitely ask you of where is the revenue and how do you get to profitability. And that's important.
yeah.
It becomes trickier, right? Like it's much easier for a B2B startup to sort of prove that, because you can get couple initial customers and you can show some traction.
Yeah.
For B2C, where you have to go at scale, it becomes a bigger challenge. And then you rely to convince your investor that if I do A, B, and C, here is how the revenue will come.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the entire story of an emerging sector.
Yes. That's the story of an emerging sector.
And you possibly then also choose your investors wisely, right? You choose somebody who will back the faith in the emergence of fintech.
Oh yes, I think you sort of nailed it. That was our biggest decision when we got funding at FI, because we knew you couldn't build a neobank overnight or in 3 months or 6 months. It was going to take time. To get an investor, we launched literally 15 months after we got our funding. That would be crazy for most investors. Would say no chance.
They would wear out on patience.
They'll wear out on patience, right? 3 months, 6 months, you got to be out of the door. And we were very lucky to have our initial investors that showed that patience and faith in us, that allowed us to build a product, do research, get the design right, get the implementation right before getting out of the door. That's rare.
It's rare, yeah. You say 15 months is what it took for you to roll the product out, right?
Yeah.
And like impatience of an investor is in one side. What was happening? What happened in those 15 months? Because there is the pressure to roll out, coupled with build a really strong team. What features do you prioritize, right? So there are a bunch of things that are happening, right? And how, just walk me through some of that.
Sure. Few things happened. Like the first thing the mind thinks is COVID happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, is that what also set things off a bit?
A little bit. Right. So 3 months, or I would say 4 months into we starting work on this, March 2020, and the pandemic happened, and we were 25 of us at that time, and still hiring at a fast rate, trying to build the team and get the product out of the door, still working with our partners and helping design the final APIs that would allow us to build that product. So it was interesting. Now you couldn't go to a partner's office, sit with them and co-design things.
Yeah.
You couldn't travel. People were each back at their homes all across India.
Yeah.
We luckily already were on I would say, a video platform with Meet, but ensuring that everybody had access, everybody was not staring down their screens 14 hours a day, so they needed maybe monitors or something to help them. So the first 3-6 months was
There were cultural shifts that were happening. Yeah, that was across. Yeah, true.
And then you bumped from 25 to 100, and so you had to incorporate almost 3x more of the team that you had, get them ready, make them understand, and at the same time make decisions of what's in an MVP, what's outside of MVP. You couldn't go and meet people because research is not one time.
Yeah.
Research is ongoing.
That's
so
true.
Research also stopped in person.
Yeah. And if you had to do, people had to block their time, and that was challenging.
That was challenging. And whatever said and done, research over video doesn't feel that personal to get real insights out.
That's true.
So there was everything that was going thing, right? So we started using, luckily for us, the team that we had was also our actual final audience of Millienials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
How do you start tapping into them?
Yeah.
Get insights from them. Get them decide what's in MVP and what's not in MVP.
Wow, so that became like a cohort of research
That became
in-house.
a cohort of research. We actually ran what we call internally as like the 5 challenges.
Yeah.
Where we said, if today you want to remove a feature and add one in to make this product finally feel complete, what would that be?
True.
And a lot of interesting ideas, and we gave research to all of these when we were doing these challenges. So a lot of interesting ideas came from the team itself.
Yeah.
So, and that also meant that we partnered people across different, so a marketing person with an engineer, a product manager with a strategy guy, or a designer with a business person.
Yeah.
And that ensured that the team interacted with each other during this period.
Yeah.
So the team literally went, above and beyond, started working Saturdays.
And that was a call that I think people just took naturally. Like, they were happy about things that were happening across within the company at a point
They
of
were
time.
motivated to get this out of the door. And I would say we were able to launch despite all those hiccups because of the team.
So was there like a launch day set? Was there like, this is T0?
We wanted to launch way before, right? I will be honest, like our dates moved. But the dates moved for good reason. We wanted a certain level of quality before we launched. We also, of course, there was a dependence on partners to, we were integrating with the core banking system for the first time. There was no other consumer neobank in the country. So we had to stress test everything. We were dealing with people's hard-earned money. And so ensuring that we don't get anything wrong was very critical for us.
So when you say push, right, and that's a good one actually, because I see a lot of tech companies have this challenge. They push launches for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
What is the mindset that you need to have? Because when you talk about pushing a launch, a lot of things change.
Yes.
The sentiment of customers evolve so rapidly today.
Yeah.
Right? And COVID's shown us that.
Yes.
The team could or could not change. Is it dependent on the quality of the product? A lot of things are moving, and when you push, a lot of those also end up taking some level of stress. So what's the mindset that you need to have, and when should you take that decision?
I think we need to take that. It can't be taken last minute, but at the same time, you want to ensure, so that there's just two conflicting things here, right? And one thing, in any startup, you want to iterate and build on the fly. You don't want to delay your launch too much. But then the second thing, depending upon what you're building, there's a minimum level of expectation that a user has. And ensuring that you meet and match that is critical. So building that fine balance between meeting the user expectation and not building too much so that you can still iterate and go was important. There was a novelty factor, and there was your core banking.
Yeah.
So you could still, I can't say I will launch a bank but not have UPI payments.
That's core for the business. That's what it operates on.
Right?
Yeah.
Or for us, it was even important that it may not be very easily accessible, but if I have to build something and I have to go, we are a digital bank, but people's mobile number changes, people's address changes. If there's no way for people to change their mobile number on the app, I can't say I'll launch that 6 months later.
That's core. You need that.
You need that. Somebody could have put in 50,000 rupees in the account, and now we are telling, go to a banking partner, and they might be in Delhi or a city where there is no federal bank branch who was a first partner. They can't go to a different city to go and change their mobile number. There's a commitment out there to build this world digitally.
Yeah. And did you think this through before you even conceptualized feature stacks?
Yeah, so we realized what's needed in our MVP during, like I would say, much before launch. These were few things that a user expects, and again, that came through combination of instincts and research.
Yeah.
And the team cohort that I talked about earlier, and that sort of worked for us pretty well.
When you look at, say, launching a new product, right? So how I look at it is, competition is, in my perspective, a positive sum game.
Yes.
Right? It opens mindsets, it opens awareness.
Yes.
Someone else is doing the job for you.
Yeah.
But what it does is it lets niche players emerge.
Yes.
Because market expands and evolves, there is space for niche players to come in. And while Fintech is a very large gamut, you guys did something like that, right? Now, when you look at the roadmap of what you're building, someone else is going to build something faster, better, and there's competition.
Yes.
Does and should a FOMO, does it catch up with you, or does it impact you? How do you deal with that?
It's an interesting one, right? At least I can tell you from my personal front, I have not worried too much about competition. I've kept a close eye on them because they might have understood something about the user that I might have missed or something. So it's important to understand how they are.
You may not know everything. Yeah.
You may not know everything,
That's
right?
true.
Like, so you want to be humble and figure out what's there. But at the same time, you started with a mission statement to solve and create a certain impact. Are you towards that way? And is the data showing you that you're towards that way? So far as your data that's showing, so you can't just say, you know what, I'm going to do this, and independent of data, I keep continuing and not changing. So far as your data is showing that you're on that right track that you expected, and this is what you want to solve, you go for it. Because sometimes there's always a tipping point for any startup. You start very slow and you reach a tipping point where word of mouth happens, where suddenly people discover why this product works for them, and then it takes off.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be one of those guys, right? Like I use this card. I go around talking to people. I'm like, are you on FI?
Yeah.
And they're like, what is FI? So maybe I'll give my definition of it. And they're like, why should we be on FI? And to that, beyond the features, because that's more experiential, my answer to that is, you've got to experience being on FI, which is a neobank, for you to understand the convenience that it can bring to you, you know, in terms of just using banking as a service. So, and you're right, like, while I know this is a sector where people will not move out of the product so easily.
Yeah.
They might have another account, another platform, but they will not move out. The hesitation's still there, right? But what is the role that competition plays? Because a couple of others suddenly emerged during the time you guys launched. How do you deal with competition in terms of what they're doing? While I know you're not driven by FOMO or it doesn't catch up with you, how should you look at competition? Because sectors evolve.
So I think banking is a huge sector, right? India has 1,000 odd banks, and even if you take it like, you know, the top banks in India with 1 million plus customers, there are many of them. So at least from a neo-banking sector perspective, competition is great because it's making, you're doing something new in this market. Having multiple players doing that thing new actually says, you know what, this is something that I should try out.
Yeah.
And banking is all about trust.
Yeah.
It's very easy to give out free money in terms of lending.
Yeah, I was just going to come to that. Yeah, the market's driven by offers, right?
Yeah, but even without offers, let's ignore offers. If I were building a lending product or a credit card, everybody wants it.
Yeah.
People want free money at zero interest rate or low interest rate. Very easy to do it. We chose the hard path here to solve our mission statement, which was tell people to put their hard-earned money into the bank accounts by a partner. Now you might argue that, you know, that's a RBI regulated bank and the money is actually going there, money is not with FI. But still the brand that the user sees is FI. So FI had to build that trust with the user. And when they start seeing a couple other players in the market doing that, they're like, okay, this is actually the
features
future.
picking up.
Yes.
People are gravitating towards this.
People are gravitating. They're saying that, you know what, I will try it out. And nobody's going to change it on day one. As they try out, and they maybe try out like couple different players and use it for 3 months or 6 months, they know, this is adding value to me here, right? Like I'm now starting to get some insights about my finances. Maybe I'll put in a little bit more money in here and try it more. And now when I'm convinced, oh, wait a second, why do I have to do this of moving 10,000 or 20,000 from my main bank account to here? I'll start just putting my salary out there. And we've seen that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So you're changing the habit of something that's traditionally existed in someone's mind.
Yes.
And it's tough. I'm just curious to understand. Today, people will have multiple SIPs.
Right.
They'll have maybe multiple bank accounts.
Yes.
They'll have multiple ways through which they are lending, investing, right? Finance is typically these three things. How does the roadmap of a product like FI, and I'm saying this as I'm trying to understand this as an entrepreneur, how does the mindset of a product's roadmap fit in with so much that's happening? Where do you start and how do you see the future?
See, first thing you realize is you can't do everything.
Yeah.
Right? You can't build as what I call as featureitis, where you just try and build everything out there.
Yeah.
You need to figure out what you are good at, what value are you adding. So your roadmap really goes and is also controlled a little bit both by your initial users and the feedback you get from them, because it's a iterative system in that sense. But also what will add more value and what your strengths are.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of those factors. From our perspective, we've got people, and again goes back to not moving away from the mission statement of demystifying finances. What we did with V1, because it was an MVP, it was the minimum viable product, it only gave you sneak peeks to what's to come in the world of demystification and understanding finances or in savings.
Yeah.
We have got 100 other things to go deep on those two rather than saying I want to do the whole world.
So you're not going horizontal in the first version, you're going deep.
We're going deep, and once we
tackling a core user problem.
Exactly. And see, as you said, right, and you've probably seen that in your design experience, when you're doing something radically different, you want to do it so well that people come to you for that.
Yeah.
And once you do that, then the same users might have some needs horizontally and you can build that on the side. But it's very, very important to build that depth where people say, what does FI give me? And the answer is same.
So most products today are gunning for something like retention or engagement in more active ways, right? They want more share of eyeballs. They want more time spent on the product. Is Fintech one of those sectors, or is FI one of those products that is measuring engagement? And is that even a yardstick for you?
it's an yardstick for any app, right? Any entrepreneur building an app just needs to know how the products interact, because it gives an idea about. So one of the questions I asked all my PMs is, how do you know our user is happy with us? How do you determine that?
Instead of taking the survey of rate us.
Yeah, forget the NPS surveys and stuff, right? Like, how do we know from data that a specific user is happy with us? You want to take this to the next level? Can you determine on a scale of 1 to 100 how happy each user is? And how do you do that? And there are a ton of factors that determine that. And
these are measurable
factors. You can, I'm like, this has been a belief of mine throughout. Through data, you can quantitatively determine how happy a user is.
And it's beyond time spent on the app.
And it's beyond time spent on the app. It's about engagement, it's about interactions, it's about everything in that sense. And that helps. But engagement is important. And I think we have been actually, I would say, very, very anal about how engagement is. And it's not just time spent on the app.
Oh, why? I'm just curious to understand why. You're a fintech product.
Yes.
That's today largely transactions.
Yes.
Some habit formation on savings, right? The rest of the features are not out as yet.
So I'll tell you why. Because different people behave differently. So there might be some person who just added some money, put it in a fixed deposit and never bothered about it for the next 6-12 months. There might be another user who is using it actively for their daily transactions. A third user who are using fit rules and putting some money for savings or investments through our app. And each category of person, the engagement expectations are different. So we're not saying that everybody should have the same engagement. That's a mistake that a lot of people do. We're saying there are different type of people. So somebody who's doing transactions on our app and using an operator, how many transactions are they doing in a month? What's mind-boggling for us is I've seen numbers that are insane in our app, which is at a portfolio level or at a cohort level of transacting users, people are doing 30 transactions a month on Fi, which is insane. So ignore, people are engaged. But at the same time, people who end up using fit rules are using fit rules and then telling us stories about how that helped us save that 1,000 rupees extra in that month. So it's not transaction always. It's different for different people. And it's important to measure that, because then that tells you where you can improve. You're not measuring to see your success. You're measuring to see where can you add more value, what's not working.
Yeah, true. And I want to just take a more tangential approach here, right? It's a modern technology company. It's a modern day technology company, and it's an emerging sector, right? You might have a vision, and as founders, you like to stick to that. And you've grown from, say, 25 people to 175, right? Whether or not we talk through the lens of Fi, but what is the mindset on culture? How do you retain the authenticity of talent and culture? Because you've also experienced working in Google, right? And you've experienced staying in the West. Does a lot of that come in, and how ready is India for something like that?
It's, my past experiences have influenced me a lot, right? I started my career in a startup and then spent 13 years at Google, both in Mountain View and India. And even saw the difference within Google, within Mountain View and India. So we're very clear that right from the start, we wanted to build a culture that we'll be proud of, that team would enjoy coming to office, being part of interacting with people. So I think even before we got initial funding, we wrote a culture doc between Sujit and me.
That happens, right? Yeah. If you're influenced by the West, that typically happens. We've got that,
So you wrote that culture doc, and then, but here's the thing, culture cannot be built by writing. And culture, you can only set an example, and your initial 100, 200, 500 people actually build the culture for any big company.
Yeah.
So what you can do is set an example, and then hope that the folks that you hire take that forward. So one of the things is, on the 4 parameters we hire people, one is we try to assess culture during our interviews and see whether they would be, matching the culture that we have, whether it's on doing the right thing, collaboration, we over me as we call it, and a few other things.
Yeah. So where do you stand on the spectrum of the team needs to be a sports team versus a family?
So, I call the team an Epify family. Epify being a company name, or the Phi family, right? We call it ourselves Fiends. And
But that's the coin term, is it?
that's the coin
Peons.
term.
Okay.
Right. So that's what we call ourselves, and it's a family in that sense. But at the same time, that family knows that there's a mission that we are out there to solve. So you are energetic, you are ensuring that you do that, but it's not a laid back kind of a family approach, but a more out there, go make this happen for our users.
Yeah, interesting. We're one of the last things that I sort of want to touch upon right now is what's going to happen from here on, right? There's a lot of conversation around Fintech, around Web3, right? Around the emergence of decentralized finance. How does it go from here, especially with the Indian context? Like, what is the future of this sector looking like?
Of course, the regulator will play a huge role in that as far as India is concerned. But I think there is huge opportunities to provide the next level of infrastructure and platform.
And this is across markets?
This is across markets, right? There are few things that Web3 and a decentralized framework where there's no central holder provide. Now, the mistake that people do is that everything is trying to be force fit there.
Yeah.
You can't build every feature by making it decentralized. In some features, there is importance and there's value in it, having it centralized. And there are some in which decentralized helps. So I think it's picking and choosing.
Yeah.
There are enough cases for blockchain and stuff that you have to do.
It's a force fit in a lot of cases, I agree.
And you have to avoid that force fit. That's at least my theory on it.
Yeah. Is investments an active area where things will start to change, especially with neo-banking?
Yes.
Because it's not started as yet.
Yes.
And there's a gap clearly, right?
You will definitely see, but you might see in different ways, right? Like whether you're investing in what are you investing, right? Yeah. Safe investments versus really risky investments. How do you move the more risky investments to more moderate to medium risk? And there will be interesting things there.
Yeah. Where does, across all functions, right? What takes precedence typically in your mind? Is it product first? Is it marketing first?
Neither.
All right.
Okay. So what's first is consumer, the user.
Yeah, correct, for sure.
And that's important to understand, right? Like you could say I'm a eng-driven company, a product-driven company, a marketing-driven company. We have something that goes in the company saying, do what's right for the user first.
And that comes as a need gap?
And everything, right? Even when you're designing your marketing or you're deciding what your MVP is or what's that next feature to be done, you almost have to say, put yourself in the shoes of the user and saying, if I were here, what would I want? Or I'm not liking, what I need to tweak a little bit.
And do you guys do this often as research?
Both, right? I think the question is like in any discussion, what's the user perspective?
Yeah.
If we are launching X, what is in it for the user there?
Yeah.
And that is important, which is why we this question gets asked us internally, are we a product company? Like, neither. We are a user company, consumer or user, whichever way you want to call it first.
And is that, so that's also an action beyond dialogue. Right?
Yes.
And it has to be experienced.
And it has to be part of your DNA.
Yeah.
Like all your conversations have to focus on that. Otherwise, what will happen? They'll start focusing purely on business metrics or purely on design. But everything has to be on like, okay, this might look great, but does it add value to the user?
A lot of times, startups, tech companies typically lose the essence of what they stand for in wake of customer acquisition.
Yes.
Right? Retention is far behind in the game rather.
Yes.
Right? Because your money is coming from an investor who is keen on traction for an exit.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's typically the game.
True.
How do you tackle that? Because that's a vicious cycle.
And you have to be strong about it right from the start. I'll give an example. Today, we have way more than 1 million accounts that have been opened with a partner bank or with a wealth front in that sense. But we have had way more users who have actually shown interest. Today, just because we can't build a focused product for everybody, we still giving, most only working professionals are who are being able to access all the 5 features on the app. We are still saying for students, we are telling them, wait, we'll build more for you and build it for them. If it was the only focus was on customer acquisition, we could have easily given a couple million other users access.
Yeah.
But we don't want to do that. Because
so it's still more selective.
We're still more selective. We want to build the right product for them.
You open the tap on acquisition once you've mastered that.
Exactly. Because see, an investment for a working professional and an investment for a student would be very different.
Yeah.
You have to be focused.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, you just have to say, might make some users unhappy saying, why you're not giving me access, but you just have to do that because in the long term, you're doing the right thing for them.
Yeah.
And to your point that yes, there's a huge pressure about investments, but there's no point having, let's say, 10 million users, but only 500,000 engaged or active users. It's better to have 3 million users, but 2 million of those engaged.
Yeah. That's the Airbnb story. Okay,
yes,
very interesting.
It's more to say, do 70% of your users are app active, when most places like 20%.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
That
and then wire the DNA internally and with investors that this is what we're tracking and this has long-term benefits.
Yes.
Interesting. Great. So just zooming ourselves out, right? Like getting deeper into knowing you as a person, right? If you were to have 1 or 3 people who you could invite to a dinner table conversation, who would that be and why?
Living?
Anyone.
Living, dead?
Living. Anyone living.
Wow.
It makes you think, right?
It definitely makes me think, right? Like I think knowing me, it's, you will see there are various, and influenced by both technologists on one side and spiritual people on the other side.
Wow.
Right. So, some of the spiritual people I followed are no longer, which is why I asked.
Which is why I said, let's make it a little more practical. Like if you had to have 3 people on a dinner table.
I think, we'll definitely have like Sundar as one of them. Just being influenced would have been maybe like Steve Jobs in the past, but like from that side, I'm a big sports fan. So
we talked about it,
whether it's Formula 1 or cricket or golf, but I have a sports person as a second one, and there are a bunch of them, right?
Sure, fair.
Sports crazy friends. So I can name you in cricket, I can name you in golf, or I can name you anywhere, right? Like and then maybe a spiritual person. So my ideal combination would be tech, sports.
And who would you pick in spirituals?
Spiritual, not naming person, but like I'll name a person who's unfortunately no longer there, but revered J.P. Vaswani. Was someone who I had still think as someone who the knowledge or the thing of being peaceful and loving to everybody is something that's learned from there, right? Like there, that you need to do that in today's day and age, even more so.
Yeah. And on to one of the last ones, right? What is your weekend cutoff zone looking like beyond work?
Playing sports with my son.
What sport do you play?
Cricket, badminton, you name it, right? That's my way to de-stress these days. Personally, I do also end up playing chess quite a lot.
Yeah.
Used to play golf. Haven't got much time and opportunities these days, but probably
We
will
should
get back to
totally do
that.
golf in the city. I have a very, very faint understanding of the sport. I've played it a couple of times before and someone's taught me. But we should totally do that on a Sunday.
Look forward for that.
I'm trying to get a little more into the scene of where do I find golf courses in the city, and
Luckily, Bangalore has a lot more
Lot of
courses
them,
than
right?
I had in Mumbai, right?
Yeah.
So works perfectly.
amazing.